Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be a little bundle of joy for you today. As you can see, I put DMV after my name. It's not a mistake. That's the way we say veterinarian, doctor in veterinary medicine in French. It also makes me feel, when I go and try to look at PRRS, I feel like the degree I got is about driving a car. Okay, so we have covered the sad state of the union for PRRS is since the inception. PRRS has wreaked havoc in production. There's going to be a lot of Franglish in that presentation. I apologize in advance. And in 30 years, what we've seen is the virus get more virulent, it's more persistent, it's more transmissible. On what we have discussed a little bit before, Daryl, what you bring, I don't think the crew has created a lot of problem in what we're dealing. What we're dealing with PRRS, we have created. We are the people at the table here have been creating the havoc we're dealing with. We're dealing with bigger population, bigger sow farm. We have created multi-region system, which once PRRS attack a region, we can move it in another region, and that infected a lot of farm. We're deregionalizing our production, which has a lot of positive, but PRRS has thrived on all those aspects of it. And basically, the veterinary community, we battle that virus, but what we find is that we don't have made any headways. Vaccines are little to no effective at this point. Closure takes longer to bring farm to stability. And really the only solution that remain effective has been farm isolation and filtration by bioexclusion. It's feasible at some level for sow farm, boar stud and genetic, but when you go to commercial or growing pigs, this is not the case. So let's go back to the nice time, the early days. Basically, it was until the mid-2000, and fortunately in Oklahoma was until 2013. At that time, PRRS created production reproductive failure, and they were very severe and heard that it was naive. Vaccine prior to exposure to virus would give us some good protection. And what we were seeing that is very different for new veterinarian, new people that work in production now is when we used to have commingled pigs, the pigs that come from the acute sow farm suck. But the pig that you would put in the next room next to them would do fine. So you would have room of pigs that would close at 2% next to room that would close at 10%. And people say, PRRS pigs closing at 10%? Yes, they used to close at 10%, not at 25, 30%. And they would have good performance after that. Those pigs would seroconvert to PRRS, and you would have evidence, but you would have very minimum to no clinical sign on them. So at that time, you say, yeah, there's no justification to have closure in those farms. I just gonna roll in, do my stuff, work with the break, because the cost of the closure associated to the parity distribution that you screwed up and everything, those was not the value that you were not capturing a value to justify that. And that's what we deal with until basically the new virus come. But when we look at vaccine at that time, FLV vaccine in growing pig, the golden standard was basically you vaccinate the naive pigs, you get them exposing after 4 weeks or later, and it would have excellent protection against a wide variety of virus. That was repeatable, that was done, and I agree with Clayton, what he said earlier, in the good old days. But when you were vaccinating growing pigs that had immunity or coming from unstable farm, there the results were a lot more sketchy. And some of the time it appeared to work, some of the time it didn't appear to work. So when we were looking at it, is this an effect of maternal interference in those pigs, especially when you look at pigs that were coming from stable herd. So there were no virus, but they would have immunity. So do we have maternal interference? Is it real? So I'm just going to go quickly to a small trial we've done where we compare basically using MLV vaccine in pigs that were PRRS PCR negative but had immunity. And we basically compare a full dose or a half dose of MLV vaccine being given either at weaning or 2 weeks post-weaning. And then at 6 weeks after weaning, we challenge them. So the pigs that were vaccinated at weaning at 6 weeks to develop immunity were the one that we vaccinate 2 weeks after weaning at only 4. So when you look at immunity there, on ELISA, what you see is the pigs that received 2 cc versus 1 cc had a higher response, but the pigs that were vaccinated later had a better response than one. So we say those seem to make sense. The response there appear to be different. So on ELISA, they were significantly lower in non-vaccinated animal. There was no significant difference between the dose, although there was numerically one. The interesting thing is when we look at results, there were no difference in mortality, but when we look at overall average daily gain in those pigs, the pigs that were vaccinated at weaning at a lower average daily gain than the pigs that were vaccinated at 2 weeks of age, and there was no difference between half dose and full dose. So despite those pigs having a higher time to respond, you could say you could have delayed that immunity, it still appeared that when you vaccinated pigs that had immunity later in life, we had a better protection. So the new reality, we're dealing with more virulent strain. What we see in the sow farm has not necessarily changed on the abortion rate stage of it. What we see has been a higher sow mortality, higher piglet mortality, and a longer tail where the pigs stay viremic longer and performance are worse. When we look at the weaned pigs, we see more loss in the unstable phase. Again, a longer tail. Those losses are a lot bigger. We see the big difference as being more clinically meaningful horizontal transmission, mean the pigs that you give with those other pigs that are keeping the same site get sick, often around 8-9 weeks of age, and then they start crashing and burning, which make the commingling of those pigs more and more problematic. Then, as I was saying, vaccines are less and less effective because we've started seeing pigs that were vaccinated on the gold standard approach, that were naive pigs, vaccinated with a full dose of vaccine, get challenged at placement and finisher, so they have up to 8 weeks to respond, and having 25 to 40% mortality in those pigs when they get infected with 144 or other IPAT PRRS. Could it have been worse without vaccine? Yes, it could. But calling a 40% mortality effective, I'm sorry, we don't have a good solution right now. We need to work at finding something better than what we got right now. So what do we do now? So when we have nursery located too close to growing pigs or finisher located to growing pigs, there's two options that you have there is basically you raise pigs from those sow farms so that you're at least dealing with the same strain, or you raise negative pigs in hoping that you will protect the region. In some case, we tried that. This is an example where we'll talk about the back and forth effect. We had a high PAT virus in PRRS associated with two sow farms. So the 34 and 35 are 26,000 sow farm. 126 is the nursery that used to receive the pigs from those two sow farms. And basically, you look the distance, it's about half a mile to a mile away from those sow farms. Very close. That's in Oklahoma. So if you would compare in distance in Guyman, would be like, not in Guyman, but in Iowa, would be like that farm is built about 75 feet from each other. So we decided, okay, it's a very high PAT PRRS. Those two farms are in enclosure, and actually they are depopulating, but we got to keep the plant full, so we need to place pig in those nurseries. So we're going to place pigs that are stable, negative into those nurseries, and hopefully we will protect those sow farms and help the region around. Well, we had basically that nursery was infected 4 times in a 60-week period with the strain that were at 34 and 35. That nursery was depopulated every time it was infected. Then as we were placing pigs back in, they would stay negative for a term, but never more than 2, and then reinfected. Last time there was only 500 sows left in both of those sow farms and were finishing their depopulation. Then when those farms were repopulated, that nursery was receiving pigs from those negative farms, and they circulated a vaccine-like strain, and then that vaccine-like strain ended up in the sow farm was sitting next to them. So when you're dealing with that type of location, what you will see is a lot of virus movement back and forth. So if are we better off basically raising pigs that are coming from that sow farm so they have immunity from that sow farm? I would tell you in that situation, because of the pathogenicity of the nursery, of that virus, we should have kept the nursery empty and not putting anything there. But in a situation where you are dealing with, you better keep the region and have pigs that have immunity there. So you can keep the nursery empty, you can filter the sow farm, or the solution that we usually end up that is cheaper is just go get a drink. So if you're talking about growing site, and you have to commingle pigs, you got to be careful because PRRS don't equal PRRS. In some situation, and with a lot of viruses, we have good success with commingling pigs of different status where we still see response that are similar to what we've seen in the past, but they're not all equal. And the more you are combining source, the worse it's going to end up. Or the more bullet you're putting in the gun when you're playing Russian roulette. Are they have similar early colonizer? Are you dealing with source coming from the same multiplication, etc.? You got to observe, you got to look at data, you have to look at performance overall in those nursery, in early and late nursery and early finisher. But the late nursery and early finisher are probably a better characteristic or descriptor of the mortality. Site that will allow it will do single sources all in, all out. Isolated site, limit risk and lateral transmission. I wish I had a lot of those, but unfortunately those don't happen very often. So you have to basically pick your poison to choose, do I go single source continuous flow or I go commingle all in, all out? And with a lot of those higher pathogenic virus, going in continuous flow is the better solution of the two. Modify live, despite the bashing I've done about the vaccine, I still use vaccine. Naive pigs will be done at weaning because that's the best time we can do it. On immune pigs, we will do it 4 to 5 weeks of age is where we put it in place. We're not going to vaccinate farms that are falling apart or breaking, but when they have stability, that's where we do it. We have shown benefit. It's just not a very good one. It's an economical one, but it's not satisfactory when you look at pigs that it moved mortality between 18% to 20%. Still significant, still suck. So the other thing that I don't have a lot of experience, it's what vaccine to use. Do you go with the lineage ones, considering you have more lineage 1 virus? We still have used MLV. Every live, but you've got to look at regional risk. The only thing I will guarantee you is if you use a live vaccine, it's going to show up as a field virus in your region. We have seen it everywhere, all the time. So I don't care how people do the test. Those things happen. We've seen it with the MLV. We've seen it with ATP. We see it with Fostera. We see a recombinant MLV ATP. And I just dumped 1,400 gills that got infected with Prevacent, which I don't even use. So it's those things will happen. It doesn't mean that those viruses will kill animal, not necessarily, but you got to expect that that's going to create more complication in your system if you decide to use a vaccine in a region where you don't have to use it.